You know, there is a very specific sound that tells you your Saturday morning is about to go from peaceful to absolutely catastrophic. And it's not an alarm clock. It's not a dog barking. It is the guttural, grinding scream of an industrial auger biting into the earth about 20 feet from where you're trying to butter your toast. It was 8:03 a.m. The coffee was still hot in my mug, and my husband Mike was still snoring softly upstairs in a pair of flannel pajamas that had seen better decades, let alone better days. But that sound, that mechanical shrieking, yanked me right out of my morning daze and sent me sprinting to the kitchen window. I pulled back the blinds, expecting maybe a neighbor fixing a mailbox or perhaps the city doing some emergency line work. But what I saw made my brain just completely short-circuit for a solid 10 seconds because there, standing in my side yard, smack in the middle of my prize-winning azaleas, were two guys in neon yellow vests operating a massive post-hole digger. They weren't on the property line. They weren't in the easement. They were a solid 4 feet inside my yard, chewing up the turf I had spent 3 years rehabilitating, and before I could even slide the patio door open to scream at them, the ground fought back. It happened in slow motion. The auger bit down hard, the engine whined, and then, boom, a geyser of brown, muddy water shot 6 feet into the air like Old Faithful had just decided to relocate to the suburbs. It wasn't a trickle, folks. It was a torrent, a high-pressure main line rupture that instantly turned my side yard into a swamp. And the best part, the absolute cherry on top of this disaster Sunday, was seeing the contractor's heavy-duty pickup truck, which they had parked on the lawn to anchor their gear, suddenly tilt to the left. The ground had liquefied instantly, and the back tires just vanished, swallowed by the mud. The truck groaned, listed sideways, and began to sink like a budget Titanic right there in my fescue. Mike finally shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, took one look out the window at the fountain of mud and the sinking vehicle, and just said, "Did we order a pool?" before turning around to find more coffee. But I wasn't laughing. Not yet. I was vibrating with that specific kind of rage that starts in your toes and works its way up. So I threw open the sliding door and marched out there, barefoot in the cold mud, yelling over the sound of rushing water. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" One of the guys, soaked from head to toe, wiping sludge off his safety glasses, looked at me with this mix of panic and annoyance and yelled back, "HOA contract, ma'am. Expanding the perimeter fence. This is common ground now." "Common ground," I screamed back, pointing at the property stake that was clearly visible 10 feet away. "This is my deeded land. You are trespassing, and you just hit the main supply line." He started fumbling for a soggy map in his back pocket, muttering about work orders, but the truck gave another lurch, sinking down to the wheel wells now, and the water was starting to pour into the open driver's side window, filling the cab with muck. That was the moment the Battle of Oak Creek officially began, though I didn't know it yet. I just knew I was standing in a swamp while two strangers drowned their truck in my yard. About 15 minutes later, just as the city water crews were arriving to shut off the valve, a white Prius rolled up to the curb, moving with the silent, smug self-importance of a vehicle owned by a man who thinks he runs the world. Out stepped Roger. Now, if you live in an HOA, you know a Roger. He's the guy who measures your grass with a ruler, the guy who wears a Bluetooth earpiece even when he's not on a call, just so he looks busy, the guy who became HOA president because nobody else wanted the job and then let the power go to his head like cheap wine. Roger walked up the driveway, stepping delicately around the puddles, holding a clipboard like a shield. And he didn't look horrified. He didn't look apologetic. He looked annoyed, as if my water main had rudely interrupted his schedule. "Sarah," he said, giving me that tight, condescending smile. "Bit of a mess we have here, isn't it? Though I have to say, if you'd just let the crew work, this probably wouldn't have happened." I stared at him, water dripping from my pajama pants. "If I let them work? Roger, you sent a demolition crew onto my private property without notice, without a permit, and they just sank a truck into my water line. It's not your property anymore, actually," he said, breezy as you please, tapping his clipboard. "The board voted last month to reclaim the easement for the beautification project. We're putting in a uniform privacy fence. It's going to raise property values. You should be thanking us. You can't just vote to take my land. Roger, that's not how deeds work." I snapped, feeling my blood pressure redlining. "And I never received a notice about a vote." "Well," he sniffed, adjusting his glasses. Transparency requires participation. Sarah, the minutes were posted in the clubhouse. If you don't read them, that's hardly my fault. That line, right there, was the match in the powder keg. Transparency requires participation, coming from a man who ran the board like a secret society. I looked at Mike, who had come outside with his phone and was silently filming everything, capturing the sinking truck, the geyser that was now just a bubbling mud pit, and Roger's smug face, and I knew we weren't just going to fix the pipe. We were going to fix the whole neighborhood. The contractors were shouting at each other now, realizing their truck was effectively totaled by water damage, and the city utility guy walked up, looking grim. "Mrs. Miller?" the utility guy asked, ignoring Roger completely. "That's a 3-inch main. They cracked it wide open. The repair bill alone is going to be in the thousands, plus the cost of the water lost. And based on the flow rate, that's a lot of water." "Send the bill to him," I said, pointing at Roger. Roger laughed, a dry, nervous sound. "The HOA isn't liable for accidents caused during necessary improvements. Actually, the bylaws state that homeowners are responsible for infrastructure on their land." "You just said it wasn't my land," I yelled. "It's a gray area," he said, turning to walk away before I could tackle him into the mud. "We'll discuss the fines later." "Fines?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "For obstructing an approved project and damaging contractor equipment." He called back over his shoulder, getting into his dry, clean Prius. "Expect a letter." I stood there, shivering in the mud, watching him drive away, and I realized this wasn't incompetence. This was a shakedown. That afternoon, I went into war mode. I'm a retired landscape architect. I spent 30 years reading plats, surveys, and municipal codes. I know where lines are drawn, and I know how to read the fine print that guys like Roger ignore. I pulled every document I had on our house, the original deed, the survey from when we bought the place in '98, the county assessor's maps, and laid them all out on the dining room table. There was absolutely no common ground designation for my side yard. That land was mine, clear as crystal, and there were no easements recorded for a fence, only for the utility line, the exact line they had just drilled into because they didn't bother to call 811 before they dug. Around lunchtime, my neighbor Betty came over. Now Betty is the neighborhood surveillance network. If a squirrel sneezes 3 streets over, Betty knows which tree it fell out of. She tapped on the back door, holding a plate of sympathy cookies, and looking over her shoulder like she was being followed by the KGB. "You didn't hear this from me," she whispered, stepping into the kitchen and closing the blinds. "But Roger is panicking." "He didn't look panicking," I said, pouring us coffee. "He looked like he wanted to find me for bleeding on his shoes." "That's the act," Betty said, leaning in. "I heard him on the phone with the treasurer, Linda, while I was walking my dog. They're scrambling because there is no budget for this fence. Sarah, the accounts are empty." "What?" I asked. "Our dues just went up 20% last year." "Exactly," Betty said. "Roger has been spending it on this beautification initiative to buy votes for the re-election next month. He's promising everyone new fences and fancy mailboxes if they keep him in power, but he's robbing Peter to pay Paul, and now that he's drowned a truck and blown a water main, he's trying to figure out how to pin the cost on you so the board doesn't find out he's broke." She slid a small USB drive across the table. "What's this?" "Audio," she winked. "I might have accidentally left my voice memo app running during the last coffee with the president's social hour. He admits the fence line is bogus, he says, and I quote, 'We'll just build it and claim adverse possession if they complain later.'" I gripped the USB drive, feeling the cold plastic in my hand. This was it. This was the motive. That night, the letter Roger promised arrived taped to our front door, printed in a font that looked suspiciously like Comic Sans, accusing us of gross negligence and destruction of HOA assets, demanding payment of $4,500 for the truck towing and repairs, plus the water bill. Mike read it and laughed, a dark, humorless sound. "He wants us to pay for the truck he ordered to trespass on our land. He wants to scare us," I said, staring at the paper. "He thinks we're just a retired couple who will write a check to make the problem go away. He doesn't know who he's dealing with." The next few days were a blur of research and rage. I went down to the county clerk's office and pulled the permits, or rather, the lack of permits, because it turned out Roger hadn't filed a single application for the fence, which meant the entire operation was illegal from the jump. But then things got weird, scary weird. I came home from the grocery store on Tuesday to find my garage door cracked open about 6 inches. I knew I had closed it. Mike was at the hardware store, so the house should have been empty. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked in, grabbing a heavy flashlight from the glove box. I didn't find anyone inside. Nothing was stolen. The TVs were there. My jewelry was there. But in my home office, the files on my desk had been moved. The stack of survey maps I had printed out was shuffled, and my laptop was open, though it was locked. It wasn't a robbery. It was a message. Someone had been in my house. Someone wanted me to know that I wasn't safe, that they could get to me. I called the police, but without signs of forced entry or stolen goods. They just took a report and told me to get a security system, which I did immediately. Mike spent the next day installing cameras on every corner of the house, muttering curses about Roger under his breath. That weekend, Betty called me, her voice trembling. "Sarah, there's a note in my mailbox. It just says, mind your own business or lose your garden. I'm scared." "Don't be," I told her, trying to sound braver than I felt. "This means they're terrified. Bullies only escalate when they know they're losing." I decided I needed backup, real backup, so I called an old friend of mine, Dave, who used to work in city code enforcement before he retired to fish full-time. Dave was the kind of guy who could look at a pile of dirt and tell you 3 zoning violations just by the smell. He came over, looked at the crater in my yard, looked at the fake violation notice, and let out a low whistle. "This guy is bold," Dave said, grinning. "Stupid, but bold." Dave made a few calls to his buddies still working downtown, and what he found was the smoking gun we needed. "Okay, so get this," Dave said, sitting at my kitchen table the next day. "Roger claims the board voted on this fence project on February 19th, right? It's in the minutes he sent you." "Right," I said. "February 19th was President's Day," Dave said. City Hall was closed. The community center was closed for floor waxing, and there was a blizzard that shut down the roads. There was no meeting. Sarah, he forged the minutes. He forged them. Fake signatures, everything, Dave said. And the contractor, Green Horizon Services? Their business license expired 6 months ago. They're working illegally, probably for cash under the table, which is why they ran away so fast when the truck sank. So now we had fraud, embezzlement, trespassing, illegal contracting, and breaking and entering, and Roger was still walking around the neighborhood waving at people like he was running for Senate. The showdown happened at the monthly HOA meeting the following Thursday. The room was packed. Word had spread about the water wars, and people were curious. The air was thick, heavy with that specific suburban tension that usually precedes a shouting match about trash cans. Roger was up at the podium, looking slightly more ragged than usual, sweating through his polo shirt. He started the meeting with a speech about community unity and resilience in the face of obstructionists, casting meaningful glares in my direction. Then he tried to play a video. "I want to show you all what we are dealing with," he said, queuing up a clip on the projector. It was edited footage from my security camera, which he must have hacked or gotten from a neighbor, showing me yelling at the contractors. He paused it on a frame where I looked particularly crazy, hair wild, pointing a finger. "This is Mrs. Miller harassing our vendors," Roger said sadly. "This is why costs are up." I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I just walked to the front of the room, holding a thick manila envelope. "Roger," I said, my voice calm but projecting to the back row. "That video was taken 3 minutes after your unlicensed crew destroyed a city water main and flooded my property." "Sit down, Sarah," Roger snapped. "You're out of order." "I have the floor," I said, turning to the audience. "And I have some documents I think everyone should see." Dave stood up in the back and started handing out packets to the homeowners. Inside were copies of the original deed, the water repair bill for $8,000 billed to the HOA, and the coup de grace, the proof that the meeting where this was approved never happened. "Roger is lying to you," I said. "There was no vote on February 19th. The building was locked. He forged the minutes to use your money, our money, to hire his buddy's unlicensed company to build fences nobody asked for, just so he could buy your votes." The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Then the murmuring started, low and angry. Roger's face turned a color I've never seen on a human being, something between purple and gray. He sputtered, slamming his hand on the podium. "This is slander. I will have you sued." Security. But there was no security, just Mike, standing by the door with his arms crossed, looking very much like a man who was hoping Roger would try something. Then, from the middle of the room, Betty stood up. She looked small and nervous, but she held up her phone. "I have a recording," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "of Roger admitting he planned to steal the land." She played it, holding the phone up to the microphone I had placed on the table. Roger's voice, tinny but unmistakable, filled the room. "We'll just build it and claim adverse possession. The budget is fake anyway. Just move the numbers around." The room exploded. People were standing up, shouting, demanding answers. The treasurer, Linda, who was sitting next to Roger, looked like she was about to vomit. She stood up and backed away from him, raising her hands. "I didn't know," she cried out. "He told me it was legal. I just signed what he gave me." Roger looked around. Realizing his kingdom was crumbling, he grabbed his papers, tried to shove them into his briefcase, and made a break for the side door. But he didn't get far because 2 officers from the City Fraud Division were waiting in the hallway. Dave had called them earlier. They didn't arrest him in handcuffs right there. White-collar crime takes time. But they served him with a subpoena and escorted him out of the building while the entire neighborhood watched in stunned silence. The fallout was fast and brutal. Roger was removed from the board that night, a unanimous vote of no confidence. The audit that followed revealed he had spent nearly $15,000 of reserve funds on consulting fees that went right back to his own shell company. "We didn't just get our yard back, we got the neighborhood back." I ended up running for president, not because I wanted to, but because nobody else knew how to fix the mess. My first act was to cancel the fence project and turn the beautification budget into a refund check for every homeowner. We turned the crater in my side yard, once the dirt dried out, into a community garden. We planted tomatoes and peppers, and we put a little plaque on the gate that reads, "The Geyser Garden, established by the Great Flood." As for Roger, he put his house on the market a month later. He couldn't show his face at the mailboxes without someone asking him about the phantom meeting. He moved 2 towns over, and I heard he tried to run for the board there too, but Dave made a few calls and, well, let's just say his reputation arrived before the moving truck did. The craziest part of it all? A few weeks after the dust settled, the new board was going through the old files in the clubhouse basement, and we found a document from the original developer of the subdivision, dated 20 years ago. It was a warning note attached to the master plan, explicitly stating, "Do not dig in Lot 42 side yard. Main water junction located 18 inches below grade." Roger had the map the whole time. He just never bothered to read it because he was too busy measuring his own ego. So here we are. The grass has grown back. The water bill is paid, by Roger, thanks to the court order. And the neighborhood is quiet again. But every time I hear a drill or a heavy truck, I still flinch a little. I guess the lesson here is simple. Know where your property lines are. Know your neighbors. And for the love of everything holy, call before you dig. So, I'm curious, have any of you ever had an HOA try to claim your land for the greater good? Or had a neighbor who thought they were the king of the castle? Let me know in the comments below. I read all of them, and honestly, after this year, nothing surprises me anymore. Thanks for watching, and keep your fences where they belong.